Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gina Oliveri. I'm the Grassroots Engagement Manager at Results International Australia. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that wherever we're calling from around the country, we are calling from country that is traditionally owned by Aboriginal people, and to pay our respects to the elders past and present and any other elders from other communities on the line today. Today we're going to start off with a bit of a interesting story and then hear from our guest speaker. We'll have a chance to ask questions of our guest speaker. So please do think throughout the guest speaker's time, have a think about anything you want to know, and we'll have a chance to ask questions. We will then move into some announcements here from some of our grassroots, and then finish off with a bit of an activity to help us get ready for our action for this month. Just a reminder for anyone who wasn't using Zoom last month, as you can see, it's wonderful. We can all see each other. There is a button that allows you to raise your hand if you click on, I think if you click on participants, or it might just be down the bottom of your screens. They all look a bit different. So try and use that to ask your question when the time comes, or else you can type it into the chat box to let me know that you would like to ask something. And if you're dialed in and you're not on a computer, then you might just have to find an appropriate silent moment to unmute yourself and just tell us that you have a question. So we try and keep it a little bit ordered. I will also share now with you, for anyone who is using the online version here, I will put in the chat the link to this month's action and the action sheet. So if anyone hasn't looked at it yet, you can take a look and have it in front of you as we're speaking. Great, so now I'm going to hand over to Alyssa, and Alyssa's going to tell us a little bit of a story to kick us off. Alyssa.
Okay, I hope. So this story this week comes from Deseret News, and it tells the story of a Republican senator in the US who's sticking up for foreign aid despite all the threats and attacks. So the story illustrates both the humanitarian emergency on our hands and the need to back up those who are willing to speak up and try and protect our mechanisms for helping in crises like these. So face to face with victims of South Sudan's famine and civil war, the Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee strongly defended US foreign aid on Friday, despite President Donald Trump's proposed deep cuts in humanitarian assistance. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee visited the world's fastest growing refugee crisis in northern Uganda, just north of the border from South Sudan, in a point of response to Trump's America First platform that would slash funds for diplomacy and foreign aid. He said, "Without US leadership, these people would have no hope," Corker told the Associated Press in an interview. "I think Americans, if they saw what I saw here and I see in other places, will be glad that our country does what it does." So the United States is the world's largest provider of humanitarian assistance, and in 2016 gave roughly $2.8 billion in food and aid. But the Trump administration has thrown such funding into doubt. At the same time, Trump wants to boost military spending. At the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement, Corker served food to South Sudanese who had recently fled fighting in the East African nation, where the United Nations has warned of ethnic cleansing. A grandmother in a flowing green dress huddled with 5 of her grandchildren, clutching metal cups of food. The family had walked 2 weeks to arrive at the refugee camp, and nearby sat another woman with a gaping bullet wound in her ankle. So few countries are likely to suffer as much as South Sudan if Trump's budget is approved. The country is one of the largest recipients of US foreign aid. They received more than $2 billion from 2014 to 2017. The world's youngest nation was plunged into civil war in December 2013, and the fighting contributed to desperate conditions that led the UN to declare a famine in February. Roughly 1 million people are said to be on the brink of starvation. On Friday, South Sudanese refugees told Corker the stories of their misery. One man described how his hometown of Yei had been ripped apart by ethnic fighting. A woman told Corker how she was raped during her trek to Uganda. And throughout the day, Corker heard the same messages again and again. He heard, "They are giving us little food," said one woman, "food, food, food." So I think it's clear that there's never been a better time to create champions within our political leaders and to show the Bob Corkers of Australia's Parliament that they do have support. and help them have the courage to stand up for what they believe and to demand accountability for those who seek to do as little as possible amid famine and despair. So I'd like to tell you, So we have a guest speaker on the call today, and her name is Camilla Burkott. And she is a research officer at the Development Policy Centre, where she works primarily on their program of research on Australian aid effectiveness and also edits the Dev Policy blog. If anyone signed up to that, it's really good. She has a background in social anthropology, and she holds a Master of Public Health from Columbia University. And she has field experience in Eastern and Southern Africa and also Papua New Guinea. So before we hear from Camilla, I'm going to tell you all about the kind of people that we have on the call today. So on the line, we have people like Puya from Sydney City, who had an opinion piece about Australia's aid program and its benefits published in Online Opinion. And we also have Mike from Hobart, Robert, Ros and Tian from Canberra, and Alicia from Melbourne, who had letters published last week in response to the budget. So Alicia has had 8 published, and news of further aid cuts as well. So 20 post-budget letters to the editor we've had published, 52 so far this year in 2017, and a target of 100 overall. So these are the kinds of people that we have on our call today, and we'd like to thank all of you for being on the call, and we'd also like to thank Camilla for joining us as well.
Thanks, Melissa. And welcome, Camilla. It's lovely to have you on the call. And I'd just like to remind everybody, please do think of questions you'd like to ask Camilla once she's finished speaking. So Camilla, you and I chatted last week, and you were telling me about some research that you recently undertook, which was exploring why people did support aid and what reasons they gave. So what reasons did people tend to give if they were supportive of Australia giving aid?
Yeah, so with my colleague Terence Wood, we've been doing quite a bit of research over the last almost 2 years on public opinion about aid. What do Australians think about aid? Why should aid be given? And over the last year, we partnered with the Campaign for Australian Aid to place a series of questions in the Australian Survey of Social Attitudes. This is a big nationwide sort of gold standard survey. And last year it was really good because they always have a topic for the whole overall survey, and this was all about government and governance. So it fit really well to put in a series of questions about aid and government. So we asked a couple questions. We asked about 10 questions total, but a couple that really have to do with why people think that the aid should be given. So first we asked specifically whether people thought that aid should be given for the purpose of helping people in poor countries or to advance Australia's interests. And what we found was, look at the numbers so I don't misquote, 24% strongly favor helping the poor, 42% favor helping the poor, whereas only 14% favor advancing Australian interests and 5% strongly favor advancing Australian interests. And there were about 10 people who responded that they didn't think aid should be given, so they're non-answer. And then a second question, we gave people a little bit more sort of options for reasons why Australia should give aid, ranging from we should give aid because it brings direct benefits to Australia through to we have a moral obligation to give. And in that question, we had only about 4% of respondents think we should give aid directly benefit Australia. 31 think it should be given based on the indirect benefits that Australia can get in terms of security or migration outcomes. 43% think we have a moral obligation to give aid, to do so. We have a right, or we have to give aid. And another 4%, we gave another option, was to offset problems that Australia has caused in the world. So I think to this sort of research that we're doing suggests to us that the moral arguments for giving aid are really what resonate with the public, or are more likely to be effective than trying to make arguments that are based on advancing Australia's interests.
I found that really interesting because in some ways you sort of think, oh, it makes sense that people would want to know how it benefits them, and that, you know, that's the reason that people would find compelling. But I was kind of surprised that it was actually kind of moral arguments that made sense and sort of playing to people's values. And I guess we've been talking a lot about values this year, results, you know, talking about what we value and what we value as Australians, and how our government's actions do or don't match with our values. And it's often said that a budget, so we had the budget just a couple of weeks ago, and it's often said that federal budgets are an expression of values. So why is it that people say this, and what values do you think were on display in the most recent budget?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question a little bit since we chatted earlier, because I think it's, I don't know if the budget is so much is a display of a nation's values, but certainly a display of a government's values. And I think that's really interesting with this budget, because it's, in many ways, this budget is so different from the previous coalition budgets, in that it's really moved, like completely moved away from the austerity budgeting. I think it really reflects, my personal take on it is that it really reflects the government's fears about losing votes to parties like One Nation. And is really, they really want to be seen as, we're doing a lot of things for Australia. We're going to build a lot of things. We're going to invest money back. We're going to generate more income, which is a big, is an interesting thing when it's, particularly when it comes to the aid budget. So like we know, it sounds like you're all quite well versed, and it's great that you've got so many letters published and papers after the budget. I mean, we know that this year the aid budget did increase marginally over last year, basically increased in line with inflation, and that increase is mostly going to be used for humanitarian commitments, and also to cover commitments to multilateral and regional organizations, which is good. On the other hand, then, so this year and next year, the budget will rise with inflation, then it will be frozen for 2 years, which adds up to a $300 million cut over what was expected. And what it also means is that by 2021, there will have been a 33% reduction in the budget since the coalition came to power. But within the broader budget context, it's, I think, particularly galling because aid is falling by a third, but overall spending will have increased by 16%, excuse me. So it's not that, aid is being cut and everything is being cut. It's aid is being cut and other things are increasing. And particularly you look at things like the defense budget, which is on track to reach this 2% of GDP target 3 years ahead of time. I think it sort of, it indicates that this is a budget that's about what does the government think is going to get traction with voters, and aid is not one of those things that they think is going to get them anywhere politically.
I thought what you said at the start was really spot on, about that budgets aren't necessarily an expression of the values of the nation, but of the government. And I suppose I find it frustrating that the values of the nation and the values of the government perhaps don't match, or perhaps, just certain values are being picked up and acted on, in a particular political climate, or to, to sort of favour votes and to stop losing votes to One Nation or whatever it is. Yeah. And we'd like to sort of take back a bit of the narrative and I suppose have our values be heard and be acted on. And so I'm interested, something that we really struggle with, and I know that a lot of people on the line will probably relate to, is this narrative that we can't afford aid. We have to wait until we're back in surplus until we can afford to spend any money on aid. That targets for aid spending are arbitrary, and there's no point trying to spend 0.7% or 0.5%. We hear these things all the time. How do you think we challenge that narrative when we go and see our MP and they say, oh, look, aid's very important, but we just, we've got a debt problem? What sort of things would you say in response to that?
I think, so clearly the government is pushing this narrative because they're seeing that it's working in some, whatever ends they're pursuing. I think they find it's working, but I also find that a lot of the premises upon which they're pushing this narrative really don't stand up to a lot of heavy scrutiny, and I think a lot of time they just don't get. Certainly in journalism and media, you'll see interviews where they're not really pushed to really respond to. So for example, like the argument, we're in this budget emergency and we can't borrow to send money overseas. You know, foreign aid is less than 1% of the budget. Like you could cut the entire foreign aid, and I don't want to put any ideas in anyone's head, but you could cut the whole foreign aid budget and it would not really have any material effect on the budget bottom line. And as you know, as I mentioned, overall spending is still increasing. I think one of the other interesting things about this budget is they've developed this concept of good debt and bad debt, and this idea that, you know, there is such a thing as good debt. And I wonder if maybe that's something that could be an opening to really think about, okay, we've accepted that debt is part of managing a very large, complex national budget. You know, let's get into that a little. Let's dig into that a little bit. I think also some of the, you know, the other argument that you hear a lot of this, you know, we need to take care of Australians first. Charity begins at home. And I think that's a really difficult narrative because you don't want to get stuck into sort of seeming to frame people overseas versus poor people in Australia. But I would say, you know, okay, is it about we need to put, how am I going to say this? But, you know, there's a lot of aspects of spending in the budget and spending in Australia that privilege wealthy Australians over poor Australians. I mean, can we talk about it in a more holistic sense of how can we have more just, more equal society, and not so much when it's people over there, people here, but how can we improve the lot of people more generally? I think that's one thing too. I think perhaps we need to think as advocates a little bit more about the connections between foreign policy and domestic policy, and look for places where there might be domestic policy levers or connections or ways of understanding what's happening in the domestic policy sphere to advocate more around aid. That's just a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think clearly this is a long, like changing this narrative is a long game. I don't think there's any way around that. And I think saliency is an issue. I think aid is not something that very many people vote on. So for politicians, it's quite easy for them to dismiss. And this is something I would like for us to do a bit more research on, is looking at opinions and attitudes and the political. We've done a lot of work on the public opinion side, but also we need to look more at the political drivers side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know I always find it very frustrating when there's this idea of like a queue, you know, Australians first, everyone else second, and it's like, well, what if it was just, you know, people who are disadvantaged, you know, everywhere, yeah. And then people who are, you know, running giant corporations who aren't paying tax, you know, down the queue a little bit. Yeah,
and there's lots of opportunities, lots of other places where more money could be found in the budget. So it's also a question of where are they looking to generate more space in the budget from. I mean, I think, yeah, it is a finite budget, but you know, there's places where more money could be freed up if the incentives were there to free it.
Absolutely. I'd like to invite you now, if there's anyone on the line who has a question, please either hit the raise your hand button, or you can write something in the chat box to alert me. If you can't find any of those buttons, just wave your arms madly and I'll probably see you. Just whatever you need to do to get attention, and we'd love to hear some questions from the floor. We've got a little over 10 minutes for questions, so I'd love to get straight into it. Does anybody have a question? And for those who've dialed in on the phone only, it looks like Lindsay upstairs in Hobart has a question. Anyone who's dialed in on the phone, you are all muted, so you will need to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question.
Hi, Robbie has a question, Gina.
Fabulous, thanks Robbie. Perhaps the microphone could be taken a bit closer to Robbie, or he could come a bit closer to it. Robbie, we're not hearing you, sorry. For whatever reason, we're not hearing. There we go. There you go. Thank you. We can hear you now. No, now we can't. Oh, now they've gone. Okay, that went well. So who else would like to ask a question? We'll try not to lose you in the process. Bert has a question. Bert in Canberra.
Hi, Camilla. You mentioned that people who support aid tend to do it on the basis that it's a sort of moral imperative. Could it be that the people who don't support it because it's not a moral imperative, and therefore trying to argue to them that it is maybe going the wrong way? Or is it that it's sort of assumed that of those who don't support it, there's a proportion of them who would if they understood the situation?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think of some other research that we've done. I mean, I think there's always going to be people who are just not persuadable and are not interested in being persuaded. We did some other survey work, about 2 years ago, and we were asking people about a question about how much of the budget, whether they thought too much was being spent on aid or not enough or whatever. And there's a good chunk of people, I think it was close to 40% of the people who said, I don't know how much, who admitted they don't know how much money is spent on aid, still think that it's too much. I don't know how much it is, but it's too much. I think it's I don't know how much it's worth spending trying to persuade people who are clearly in that camp of I'm not interested, I don't want to engage. But it would be great. I think that's one area where there is a hole of really getting into like, who are these people? What are they, what do they stand for? What are their values? Where are their priorities? And would they be susceptible to information? I mean, I think we found in other research that people are quite impervious to facts sometimes, which is a bit frustrating. But maybe it's not just facts and numbers, maybe it's sort of stories and narratives and other kinds of information that can bring people around.
So that research you did, was that called the US election?
Thanks, Bert. Sue Packham from our Melbourne Hills group, and I see we've got Hobart back. Welcome, Hobart. I'll come to you in a sec. Sue wants to know how many people were involved in the survey and perhaps some clarification. Sue has said, it seems that less than half the people surveyed were definitely in favour of aid, which seems surprisingly low. I wonder if you can just clarify kind of the general, pros, fors and against.
Yeah, so in terms of the size of the survey, I think it's over 1,000. It's considered to be, it's a representative survey. So they do the sampling based on the census, I believe. So it's geographically and age and gender, it's meant to be representative of the Australian population. And it's done it's a paper survey that's done in 4 waves throughout the year. So theoretically that corrects for any temporary seasonal effects, or like a survey that the questions were answered just after the budget came out might be different from how people would answer 6 months from now. So the second part of the question about half the people, sorry, can you repeat or maybe I can open the chat.
I think it was just clarification around, how many people were strongly in favour versus just in favour, and kind of overall were people pro or against? So
in terms of do people prefer aid that is focused on helping the poor or focused on advancing Australia's interest? It was about 66% of people in favour of helping the poor in total, and then 19% favour Australia's interests. About 9% don't think Australia should give aid, and 6% don't know. So it's quite, we've sort of broken it down into strength of opinion. But when you split it just sort of in half, I think it's a significant majority.
Okay, cool. Hopefully that answers your question, Sue. Please do feel free to type anything more in the chat if you'd like any more clarification. I'll try going back to Hobart and see if we can get Robbie's question, if you guys can unmute. And let's see if we can hear Robbie this time.
Hey there, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Very good, thanks. Just firstly, thanks very much for that presentation, Camilla. I really enjoyed it. It was very, very insightful, I think. I had two kind of, one's I guess a general comment, the second one was a question. So I wonder I guess I sometimes struggle with this kind of dichotomy that's set up between Australia's strategic interest and helping the poor. I don't really see why those two things need to be different. And I think a lot of people on the conservative side of things all have the similar thinking. I mean, I remember seeing a quote from HR McMaster before he became Trump's security advisor, and he said, every time you cut the State Department, I have to buy more bullets, you know. So I don't know, I sometimes feel like there is space to kind of flesh that out and not set up this division. The question I had though was around, I know there's a lot of polling around whether people are pro increases in spending if it increases access to services, et cetera, and generally people are very much in favour of increased services. But the rub, as I understand it, is that people don't really have confidence in the capacity of government to deliver. And I just anecdotally, when I talk to people about aid, they often bring up this issue that they don't really believe it has an effect or it goes to where it should, these kind of things. So people kind of believe in aid in principle, but prepared to necessarily support increases in it because they don't believe it has an effect. So I was wondering if your research touched on that at all, or
no, thanks for that. And I think you're right. I think it is like a false dichotomy in a sense to split it, helping people with national interest. And I think that's part of the reason why in our second question we sort of gave this range of options, which are sort of more like, you know, directly benefiting Australia or sort of enlightened national interest, indirect benefits, which I think is probably more, and we see that's a bigger proportion of people. On your question, sorry, you're gonna have to repeat the question. I was thinking of that.
Yeah, that's all good. I suppose, I don't know if you've read that Rebecca Huntley's recent book, the Still Lucky. You know, it's this report about Australia's what's it called, the Mind and Mood report that's been.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, about effectiveness of aid.
Yeah, and it's this. At the moment, there seems to be a general kind of malaise about people don't really believe that the government can be effective anymore in Australia.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of the pushback against aid is because people believe in it, but they don't necessarily think that we can do it.
Yeah. I think one thing, so we do a bit of research more generally in the centre about sort of aid effectiveness. I think it's interesting that certainly Julie Bishop, and I've heard also Scott Morrison recently, really kind of talking up the, like, we've got a really effective aid program now, we've really been working on it, we're targeting, you know, aid for trade, we're targeting things that are going to build economic growth. I think where there's still, and I think a lot of that is true, and I think if you look, for example, the Office of Development Effectiveness in DFAT puts out a lot of work, which is generally seems to be quite positive. I think where the aid program, maybe the gap is the communication about what the aid program is doing and what results it's having is still lagging. I think under AusAid, they had a quite effective, a lot of communications channels talking about what aid does. And those really fell off when AusAid merged into DFAT, but I think there's partly a communication, perhaps a communication issue there. Yeah, that's sort of my take. I mean, I think it is encouraging that certainly the government ministers seem to be really pushing. We have a really effective aid program. There's very low levels of fraud. So I think, yeah, it's a question of whether that message gets across to the public, which I think you're right. I think there is a lot of general dissatisfaction with performance of government. And it doesn't help when you see these big scandals, the ATO scandal that just happened, and general stuff-ups that get splashed in the media. I think, yeah, that has a detrimental effect to the whole of government services and being able to deliver good services. But I think on whole, the evidence is there that there's actually this what money is spent is generally spent quite well, with exceptions, of course.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Robbie. We are kind of at time, but I'd love to hear a very brief answer to a question from our Western Sydney team. And I know Marie has a question, and maybe you can kind of ask it in your comments after Marie. Which was, has there been any research looking at the reasons behind people's support or lack of support, or any variables like demographics that are associated, so age or education level, that sort of thing?
The short answer is yes. There is some research on this. More on the demographic stuff, and there's some work that we've done, and I won't try to go into it because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we have done some work previously, and also this Australian Survey Social Attitudes has a big demographic section with all of the sort of standard questions and religious affiliation and all geographic, all sorts of stuff, income, education. So because we've just got the last wave of that, we'll soon be analyzing that. But if you want to see some of the work we've already done on the Dev Policy blog, devpolicy.org, if you search public opinion, you should be able to find some of the previous. There's a couple of posts that say like who supports aid and who doesn't. That really breaks down a lot of those demographic variables.
Great.
Thanks for that. If you want, I can send directly some of those links to some of those articles.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, perhaps as a follow-up. We are out of time, but I'd like to invite our CEO, Marie. Thanks so much, Camilla. That was really interesting and gives us a lot to chew over, I think. And as Sue has pointed out, she says, it's part of our role to point out the success stories and to try and turn that tide of public opinion. But I'll welcome our CEO, Marie, to just reflect a little and say some words of thanks. Marie.
Thanks very much, Gina, and hello, everyone. I wanted to ask my question, and I'm just going to make a comment about it. I heard Julie Bishop on Lateline the other night being interviewed when she's quite proudly said there was some synchronicity around us being the 13th largest economy with the 13th ranking in our ODA levels. And I mean, my value is that 13th isn't actually good enough, that I think that doesn't really point to us being a really strong global citizen. And I just did a couple of little quick Googles while I was listening to you, and in the last 28 Olympics we were in the top 10 for more than half of them. So that's where I want us to be. I want us to be in the top 10, and I'll be interested to go back and have a look at some of Dev Policy, or even our own fantastic policy and advocacy manager, Mark Rice, to see where our ranking is going to go with further drops in our aid levels. So I'm going to put that in my next letter, I think, about the Olympics. But Camilla, thank you. I firstly wanted to just thank you and all of the team at the Development Policy Centre for the incredible work that you do. And as Gina said, if you haven't subscribed to the Dev Policy blog, I really encourage everybody to do it, because it is a really great resource for some more in-depth information on the aid program. So I wanted to thank everyone from the team, but also to you for all of the work that you've done, for helping us to get our views up on that blog as well, and for giving up your time today to speak to all of our volunteers. It's really much appreciated, and keep up your fantastic work.
Thanks a lot, Marie, and thanks to all of you as well. I know Results, one of the most active groups, and I'm really impressed that you all are giving up your Saturday as well. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for the chance to talk, and best of luck.
Terrific. Okay, so we are, oh, maybe we can unmute and do a round of applause, or put your hands in the air. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have some news and events now. Camilla, you're welcome to stay on to hear all of this exciting stuff, or you're welcome to get back to the rest of your Sunday afternoon.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, All right, so just moving on now, I've just got a couple of announcements to go through and a bit of a challenge for everybody. So the first thing is to remind everybody to put our annual study tour to Canberra in your diaries for the 12th to the 15th of August. Applications are now open, and please go through Gina and your group leaders for those for more information. The second thing I wanted to say is that on Wednesday at 3 p.m, this Wednesday, the 31st of May, we have our results annual general meeting. We're required to have an AGM every year, and it falls this Wednesday. The dial-in details and all of the papers for the AGM are on our website if you look at our events page, and anyone is welcome, but only the financial members of Results can vote. But go to the website for that. The third event is if you're in Hobart on the 1st of July, and I'm a bit disappointed I will be there a few weeks before, but not on the 1st, you'll be able to join the Results Hobart group and kick up your heels in their 80s themed dinner dance, What a Feeling. So get your mullet hairdos and your groovy 80s gear and join them in their fantastic fundraiser. They always put on a terrific event. The next thing I wanted to say, I don't think this has ever happened on a call we've had before, but today is actually Results' birthday. So it is the day that 31 years ago Results first started in Australia. So happy birthday to all of you for your 31st birthday, so we can all celebrate together. And for those of you who were around for last year, it was around this time, I'm not sure, I think it may have been this weekend, where we had the national conference celebrating our 30th anniversary with Results founder Sam Daly-Harris. And of course, our national conference will be on again next year. So happy birthday to Results. So the final thing for me to announce today is, and this will probably have significance for a few people who have been around Results for quite some time, is that I'm thrilled to announce that as of a couple of weeks ago, Results has secured deductible gift recipient status, or DGR status. What this actually means is that donations that you make to Results are now tax deductible. In fact, any donation that you've made to Results since the 21st of December last year, when we first lodged our application with the tax office, will also be tax deductible. So this means that you can claim it on your tax, and therefore you pay a little less tax because of your donation. So I'm not sure if anyone from the board is on the call today. I know that sometimes Chris and Mia, we also have one of our marketing committee members, Rob, on the call. But if there are, I just wanted to say thank you to the board, particularly our board chair, Chris Franks, because it was really the board that made this one of their #1 priorities over the last year and a half. And it's taken quite a while, but we now finally have it. So that is significant because it is going to help us bring in additional funds to Results. I wanted to also say that with the 30th of June and the end of financial year just a few weeks away, now's actually a perfect time for any of you to make a donation to Results. Or, even better, you might want to sign up to be a regular donor to Results. We currently have about 40 regular donors to Results. My husband and I are one of those donors, and I remember when I first started with Results many years ago, when I was a volunteer in my local group, within a couple of months I'd signed up to be a $30 a month regular donor. It just seemed like a natural thing to do to help invest in the future of the organisation. We still donate to Results. It's a bit more than that now, I'm pleased to say. But $30 a month back then, and definitely now, is really the cost of a coffee a week these days. So it wasn't something that it was difficult to do. But I guess Gina actually came up with this idea because I actually now want to invite anyone on the call, because today is our 31st birthday. I wanted to invite you on behalf of Gina and I to see if there is anyone on today's call who isn't a regular donor who might want to make a commitment to everybody listening and watching of $31 a month to Results. So making a regular donation to Results with a commitment today of $31 a month in honour of Results' 31st birthday. And I'll tell you, there's a bit of an incentive. Anyone who puts up their hand to do that today will be given a special gift of a Results mug. So I'm just going to pause there. And Gina, you're controlling the mutes and the unmutes. So if anyone is on the call that is interested in making that commitment to be a Results donor today, just give us a shout.
Sorry, coming around so you can see. I'll do that, Marie.
Yay, well done, Lindsay. Fantastic.
2 years, so.
Well done. Results mug coming your way.
It doesn't make sense.
Is there anyone else who might be interested in joining Lindsay
You had one.
on our 31st birthday?
It looks like Lindsay's group does it like in the house. Hey?
Yeah, I think they alternate
People's houses. That's nice. We should just.
Okay. Well, listen, I know that we need to move on, but Lindsay, thank you. There will be some more communication about this in coming weeks, but to all of those who are on this call who are already regular donors or who have donated to Results in the last 6 months, I do want to thank you very sincerely from the bottom of my Results heart for your financial support. It is important to us, it does make a difference, and it really helps to build and strengthen our organisation so that we can continue to do what we do and to do more of what we do. So I think, Gina, I will get yanked off now and I'll leave the rest of the call to you.
Thank you, Marie. Now that we have video, I can get one of those crooks and just sort of pull you off the screen and have some vaudeville music or something. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And please, I do encourage everyone to think about becoming a monthly donor to Results, even if it's $10 a month, even if it's $5 a month. It all does help to keep us strong and in action. I'd love to now invite Jeremy from the Hobart Group to take up a spot close to the laptop so we can hear him. I'd just like to profile or give Jeremy a chance to share his story, because it's something that we've been doing for the last couple of months, is thinking about our story of self. What sort of values do we have? How did we come to be the people we are, and what sort of impact are we hoping to have on the world? And we had a bit of a potluck dinner last Saturday night here in Hobart, and Jeremy shared his story, and I thought it was a good one and wanted everyone to be able to hear it. So Jeremy, would you like to just start by sharing your story with us?
Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm Jeremy. This is my story. I'd wanted to be many things growing up. I enjoyed being creative, and I thought about being an animator. I thought about being a teacher, and I thought about being a cartographer. But when it finally reached crunch time and my school years were drawing to a close, I found myself hesitating over the next step towards any of those careers, because when I tried to imagine myself doing them, I couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't enough. Yes, I would enjoy doing them, but was I needed there? I was also a student leader in my last year of school, and the teachers did a really good job of instilling in the leaders an understanding that our job was to serve. They encouraged us to look out for the needs, to see what are there kids who are having trouble fitting in. Could we do something to help them break the ice? Look for the need and help fill it. So I'd gotten used to looking out for those needs, and I was trying to pick a path that I felt was worthy of devoting my future to, and I didn't see that need. Did the world need more cartoons? No. Maps? Perhaps not. Teachers? Well, it felt like half my class wanted to do that, and that base was covered. Where were there not enough people? There was a problem that needed fixing. Truth is, I knew the answer. I'd just been pretending that I didn't because I was scared. It was the year 2000, my last year of school, the turn of the millennium, and there was so much talk then of making the world a better place. You might remember the climax of the Jubilee Drop the Debt campaign in that year. And of course, world leaders meeting in New York to discuss a new set of global goals to work towards the end of poverty. In the midst of all of this, a guest speaker had been invited to come and talk at my school, and addressing our assembly, she presented a fact to us that none of us had been aware of up until that point, I'm sure. It was the first time I'd heard anybody say that there's enough food in the world to feed everybody and no one needs to go hungry. And I can still recall my bewilderment that this problem still existed and that apparently no one had done something to fix it by now. I remember my anger towards this generalized idea I had of world leaders or powerful people who were allowing this to continue. And I remember the first stirring of commitment in me, that I needed to find a way to help this, that I was alive to witness this time of need, and therefore I needed to be part of the solution. So I made the commitment then that I would be, not knowing what the next step would be, just knowing that I was going to look for the opportunity and say yes when I found it. And it came 5 years later when I was working at a credit union. I would wake up to an alarm clock radio, and one morning I woke up to hear a man speaking, a man that many on this call would be familiar with. His name's Ian Sansom, and Ian was being interviewed about a conference he was putting on for school students. Ian was talking about how he believed that poverty could be ended. He was talking about how that would require governments to keep their commitments to the poor and provide aid they had promised but not delivered. Provide it in ways that were effective, not just good for Australian business interests or political interests. And he believed that our voices mattered and that politicians would listen to us if there were enough of us. And he was persuasive in that belief. So I plucked up the courage to pick up the phone to call Ian, and I became a volunteer with Results. I left the credit union. Eventually I would work with Results, and we would lobby the Howard and Rudd governments and help to increase aid to the highest dollar amount it had ever been. Along the way, scoring increases for microfinance, for vaccines, for controlling epidemics. And I'm sure that our work alongside others would contribute to saving lives. So looking back on it now, I can see that in a sense I did become an animator. I was bringing things to life. I did become a teacher. I was educating my MPs, and I did become a cartographer, in that my heart went well beyond the horizon that I could see. But more than that, I was doing what I needed to now. So I share the story in the hope that if there's someone like me who was looking for an opportunity, that they might find it in this invitation, and that if you're looking for results, then we're looking for you.
Great job, Jeremy. Yes, unmute. Round of applause. Very nice. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jem. And perhaps if I can just ask one very quick question. I know that recently our last action was to have one-on-one conversations and be inviting people to join us in our meetings or to come to our events or to get involved in our groups in some way. Can you tell me a bit about what it was like to approach conversations with people and talk about values? You know, you talked about a few different values there, looking for what's needed and filling the gaps and being of service. What was it like to have those things be central to your conversation?
I did have a conversation like that recently. I'd called up an old contact with the intent of inviting them to either ally with Results or join Results because they'd been previously involved in advocacy. And centering the conversation around values really changed the sort of conversation we ended up having. It was great advice, and I thank you for that, because we started by talking about our reaction to the budget, and instead of just letting the information wash over us, by talking about our values in that conversation, by talking about empathy and responsibility and commitment, the information was colliding with our values and it was agitating us to want to do something. So at the end of that conversation, there was nowhere for us to go but say, we are going to do something about this.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. And so I encourage everybody to really do include, think about that story of self, to figure out what values you have and what values are being upheld or are being violated, and to communicate that, because it is quite a different conversation. And as we've heard from Camilla, at least when we know when we're talking to members of the community, members of the public, those kind of moral conversations about just is it right or wrong is actually quite effective. I guess what we're yet to see is, whether that's effective when we're talking to our policymakers. But it feels like it can't hurt to try. And considering how much we're having this conversation about Australian values at the moment in a big way, it seems a good time to talk about it. Now, I will go to you in a moment, Ryan. I just want to run through a bit of an activity first to get us ready for action, and then I'll come to you towards the end. And anyone who can see the chat box, I've also put, Camilla sent me the links to those other bits of research and a few blog posts for those who are interested in some follow-up information. So particularly Western Sydney, I think we're wanting to know some more stuff, so you'll find it there. So I just want to do a very quick brainstorm. This month's action, as you will have seen by looking at the fact and action sheet, this month's action is writing to your federal member of parliament, so your MP for your electorate, and telling them how you feel about the cuts to Australian aid and what happened to aid in the budget, and also what's been happening to aid generally over the last number of years. The fact that aid is increasing by, in line with inflation this year is a tiny blip on a general trajectory downwards. I don't know which way to go that it'll look right to you, but the general trend is down. The general trend is less generous, is dropping in the OECD rankings. I think we're actually going to be 19th in terms of aid spending. So, every time I hear 13th, I sort of twitch a little because I think, well, I don't think that's quite right. So it's time to, tell our elected representatives, what we think of it. In terms of our values, what values does it violate? And what do we expect our government to act like? And we're asking our parliamentarians, our Member of Parliament, to do something for us, which is to write to the Foreign Affairs Minister, Julie Bishop, and to the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, to convey, our feelings about the budget, but also to increase the likelihood of them responding and to start that dialogue, is to ask questions. So, for example, I'm going to ask something along the lines of, how can I be confident that our government is serious about any extreme poverty and ensuring all kids are in school if the amount of money allocated to this has been slashed by a third? How can I be confident that we're doing this, that we're serious about this, if the amount of money we're allocating to it has never been less than what it is now. And asking those values questions, how is it fair? How is it a demonstration of a fair go and being a good neighbour and helping your mates? So I'm interested to hear from probably just a couple of people on the call. I'd love to know what values do you hold that are either violated by the fact that our aid spending is decreasing, or that is expressed by giving aid? So perhaps, you know, you value helping, and so giving aid, you know, is an expression of that. And I just want to hear too, what questions would you do you have? What questions do you want to ask the Treasurer and Minister? So please, again, raise your hand using the raise your hand button, or wave at me, or just type something. I'd love to hear a few ideas. So is that someone in, can I hear, is that someone in Hobart? Perhaps we could start with Jeremy, actually, since Jeremy just shared his story. And Jem, you were talking about being of service and finding the need. What is it about aid cuts that violates that?
Oh, we were already off mute. There we go.
It feels like it feels to me like if we're not doing something now, then we're going to be looked back on as the only people who had the opportunity to do something, and that we failed at a responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so what question are you going to be asking your MP to ask of the Foreign Minister and the Treasurer? What's something that you want answers for?
The first thing that came to mind was do you want to be remembered for this? That might need reshaping a bit to be appropriate. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Great. Anyone else on the line? Thank you, Jem. That was cool. Yeah. Anyone else got ideas about what is the value that you hold that is violated?
Gina, sorry, it's Jane from Hobart. Okay. I hadn't actually thought about it in most terms, but actually just sitting here thinking, I think it's not just me. I think the whole nation perhaps and the world is getting a little bit sick of the rich getting richer, and the poor getting poorer, the poor not having a voice. And, you know, as we've seen in global events in the last 12 months or so. And I think in many ways, this is yet again a choice that's been made by people in positions of power without necessarily taking into account the livelihoods of others. And I think that could perhaps be woven into a letter, you know, what their decisions aren't just affecting Australians' livelihoods, but those people in other countries as well. But that it's just reinforcing that whole idea of, you know, the wealthy nations are basically controlling the outcome for those in countries with less resources.
Yep. Great. So the value of pitching in, you know, your share and
we're all in this
fairly. Yeah, we're all in this together. And, you know, how is our
surrounding the whole sustainable development goals and the fact we're signatory to them, you know, that's also gone by the wayside.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jane. So I encourage everyone to think about that. You know, what is the value that you have? What is it that you hold dear that has been violated by our decreasing aid? And what questions do you have that you want answers to? I also encourage you to send, along with your letter, any letters to the editor that you've had published. So now's the time to dig them out, snip them out of the newspaper, print off the scanned copies that you have and enclose them in your letters. And I also want to draw your attention to, and I'll pop the link in the chat box, and I'll also put this in the follow-up email I'll send out. ACFID publish electorate snapshots, which outline for your electorate how many people and schools and churches do activities that are supportive of Australian aid, and what percentage of people and what amount of money is raised, and all these really interesting things. So you can, print that off for your electorate and include that in your letter, or just take a few of the stats out of it and say, look, it's not just me, like people in our community raise money and do all these things. So I really encourage everybody to get onto your letters today, finish writing them today, get them in the post this afternoon, and let's hit our MPs with lots of letters reacting to the budget. Before we finish off today, I will invite Ryan to very quickly share his action that he took post budget, and I'll get him to explain what it is. And Ryan, I'll share my screen and bring it up on the screen as well.
Awesome, cool. Thanks, Gina. I just want to check, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep, beautiful. Okay, so obviously we saw in the federal budget the significant cut of over $300 million to aid, and so we can see that aid has seen consecutive cuts over the last 4 years now, and so what I wanted to do was create a way that we can actually start changing that. And so what you see on your screen now, if you've got a computer in front of you, is the Australian Parliament now allows electronic petitions. So before this, you had to go out onto the streets and get people to actually physically sign pieces of paper. But this way, it makes it a lot easier. We can share it across social media. We can email it to our friends and family as well. So what you can see there is the actual petition itself. Now, something really important I have to emphasize is that it is a two-step process. So after you've submitted your name and email address, you'll actually be sent a confirmation link to that email address. And it's really important that you hit that link to confirm it, like you would sign up to like an electronic newsletter or something like that. Otherwise, your signature won't count. And so what I've also done is I've created an A5 size booklet which contains a whole bunch of different information. I think Gina's got the link to that as well, which is on my website. So it looks like that, and that's probably back to front to everyone. It's about 6 pages long. So it's got the link in there. It's got a copy of the petition, and also on the link that's just been put in the chat box, you'll see that there is a link to, if you just scroll down right to the bottom, Gina, you'll see another red bit. Keep going and stop. Yep, so there you can also, if you click the download images for Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, it'll actually open up a zip file in there. So it's got images that are perfect sizes. So if you want to change your Facebook cover photo to support this, you can. If you want to do the same for Twitter, you can, and as well for Instagram. And speaking of social media, this, I guess, campaign, you could call it, has its own Twitter account. So it's @SecureAusAid. And I'm really encouraging people to use the hashtag #SecureAid. So the electronic petition closes on the 21st of June, and I'm really hoping to get as many signatures as possible. The great way of doing this is that it does require a direct response from the Foreign Minister herself. So I'm really encouraging you to get out there, share it on social media, email the links around to family and friends, and really spread it around.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ryan. And I do encourage everybody to sign that petition. I'll make sure the link is in the email as well. So thank you everyone for joining today's call. For support with taking your action, please contact your group leader or info@results.org.au. Please let us know about successes, challenges, and report what actions you're taking. Let us know at results.org.au/report. Our next action call is taking place not on the last Sunday of June, but on the first Sunday of July, Sunday, July 2nd, 3:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, 1 week later than normal due to the leadership retreat taking place on the last weekend in June with our group leaders. As always, a recording of this call will be made available and sent out either tonight or tomorrow morning for anyone who wants to review it or to share it with somebody else. And I'd like to leave you today with the words of Elvis, of all people, who said, "Values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, yet you leave them all over everything you do." Have a great afternoon, everyone, and goodbye. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.